The alien planet had always been a place of calm and beauty. Rolling forests stretched for miles, filled with trees that glowed faintly under the light of twin suns. Rivers ran silver and clear through the valleys, and the cities, built with shining towers and delicate bridges, seemed to touch the sky itself. For centuries, the people of this world had lived in peace. Their lives were orderly, their society advanced, and they had never known a real threat from beyond their skies. The children grew up learning the stories of explorers and inventors, and adults went about their work with confidence, certain that their world was safe. But that certainty began to crumble slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, with whispers carried by travelers from the far reaches of the planet. A strange name began to circulate: Deathworlders. No one knew exactly what they were, only that those who spoke of them shivered when they mentioned it. The name alone was enough to make the strongest heart falter. It started with rumors among the travelers and traders who moved between cities. A scout from a remote northern settlement returned with a story about shadows moving across the plains at night, shapes that were not animals or anything the people had seen before. Another group told of unusual disturbances in the forests: trees uprooted without reason, strange footprints that seemed too large to belong to any known creature, and the sudden disappearance of small animals that had always been plentiful. At first, the city's leaders dismissed these accounts. They told the citizens that it was likely natural causes, storms, or mistakes in observation. But as more reports arrived, the stories grew darker, more frightening, and impossible to ignore. Even the calmest and most rational minds began to feel unease, a creeping fear that they could not explain. The Council of Leaders convened in the capital city, a massive spire of crystal and metal that gleamed in the light of the twin suns. Delegates came from every corner of the planet, each representing distant regions that had never felt connected in such an urgent way. The discussions were long and tense. Some argued for preparation, for building defenses and strengthening patrols. Others believed that confrontation would be foolish, that the Deathworlders, if they even existed, might never reach the cities. Yet every time a report arrived from the borders, a new whisper of movement in the forests or plains, the council members grew more anxious. They began to understand that waiting might not be enough, that their lives, their society, might soon face a test unlike anything they had known. Despite all their intelligence, all their planning, the fear of the unknown settled over them like a shadow. Meanwhile, among the ordinary citizens, life continued, but it was different. People walked more cautiously through the markets, glancing at the skies as though expecting something to fall from them. Children asked their parents questions about the Deathworlders, and the parents, unsure themselves, could offer little comfort. Work continued in the fields and factories, yet conversations always returned to the same topic. Families gathered at night, telling each other stories to distract from their worry. In quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the glowing trees and the rivers sparkled under the twin suns, people could not shake the feeling that the world they knew was changing. That feeling grew stronger every day. Even the animals seemed restless. Birds that usually sang in the morning remained silent, and the small creatures that scampered in the underbrush seemed to watch the humans and aliens with strange awareness. It was as if the planet itself sensed the coming threat. The first real signs of fear came from the scouts. Brave individuals who had been sent to investigate distant lands returned with accounts that made even the council uneasy. They described large, shadowy figures moving with incredible speed and precision. There were no sounds, no footprints in the familiar soil, yet the evidence of their presence was clear. Trees snapped as if pushed down by enormous strength, and animals vanished where they once thrived. The scouts themselves spoke in hushed tones, eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. Some said they had glimpsed glowing eyes in the darkness, eyes that seemed to study them, calculating, patient, and indifferent to the scouts' existence. These stories spread quickly, traveling faster than any official report, and soon every city and village was on edge. The once bright streets were quiet after sunset, and families huddled in their homes, unsure what the next day might bring. In the capital, the council tried to maintain calm. They held meetings and issued reassurances to the public, but they could not hide the worry that had begun to settle into their hearts. Plans were drawn up and redrawn, strategies were discussed, and scouts were sent further afield to gather more information. Some council members advocated for open communication with distant allies, hoping that other civilizations might have knowledge of the Deathworlders. Others argued that secrecy and caution were safer, that knowledge alone could not protect them from a force as mysterious as this. Meanwhile, the ordinary people continued to live their lives, caught between the routine of daily work and the ever-present anxiety about the unknown. Markets, schools, and streets all functioned, but the laughter that once filled public spaces was quieter, more restrained. The very air seemed heavy, as if the planet itself held its breath. As the days turned into weeks, the fear deepened. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, and night came with a quiet that felt unnatural. The wind carried whispers of things, unseen, and even the strongest citizens felt the pull of anxiety in their chest. Families prepared in small ways, fortifying their homes and storing food, though no one could say exactly what they were preparing for. Scientists studied the skies, hoping for a sign or clue, but the skies remained calm, betraying no hint of the approaching visitors. The council tried to balance order with honesty, but uncertainty ruled every decision. Every night, the twin suns disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving cities bathed in the soft glow of artificial lights, and every night the people of the planet waited, hearts heavy with fear as shadows moved quietly at the edges of their vision. It was in this uneasy calm that the story of the planet began to change. A civilization that had known only peace was learning to feel fear, to wait for the unknown, and to confront the possibility that the world as they knew it might not last forever. They could see the shadows, hear the whispers, and sense the growing presence of a force beyond comprehension. And so, under the twin suns and in the glow of their shining cities, the aliens waited, hearts pounding, knowing that their lives were about to be touched by something they had never imagined. The rumors and small disturbances that had once seemed minor now became impossible to ignore. Reports came from every corner of the planet, villages, forests, and distant mountains, of strange occurrences that nobody could explain. Scouts returned with more than just stories this time. They brought back footprints that were unlike any creature the aliens had ever known. The prints were enormous, far larger than the feet of the tallest citizens, and the depth of the impressions in the soil suggested immense strength. Sometimes the footprints appeared to vanish suddenly, as if whoever or whatever had made them could step between the trees and soil without leaving a trace. At first, the scientists and scholars tried to rationalize these signs. Perhaps an unknown natural event, they suggested, or some previously undiscovered animal. But even as they searched for logical explanations, their experiments and observations failed to account for the evidence. Something entirely unfamiliar was approaching. And the more they studied, the clearer it became that fear was not unfounded. Among the alien population, the sense of worry grew into something heavier. Markets that had once been lively and full of chatter became quiet. Children no longer played freely in the streets. Even the youngest ones seemed to sense that something had changed, that the world outside their homes was no longer entirely safe. Families locked doors more carefully, and community gatherings were smaller, more subdued. Citizens began whispering to each other in hushed tones, exchanging stories about shadows seen at the edge of forests or lights in the sky that flickered in unusual ways. Every movement in the trees, every rustle of leaves made them pause and look with anxious eyes. They could not shake the feeling that the unknown was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to appear. The Council of Leaders grew increasingly concerned. They realized that their citizens were no longer living with calm confidence, but with a creeping anxiety that threatened to paralyze everyday life. They called for more scouts to be sent to the distant regions, but the scouts returned with little concrete news. Only tales of shadows that moved silently, of trees that were bent or broken as though by invisible hands, and of the disappearance of wildlife in areas that had been thriving moments before. Reports were often conflicting, yet all shared a single truth. Something immense, powerful, and intelligent was moving across the lands, and it was coming closer to the cities. The council debated endlessly. Some leaders called for immediate, defensive preparations, strengthening walls, and building watchtowers in strategic places. Others feared that any display of aggression might provoke the unknown visitors and preferred caution and observation. Tension grew among the leaders, reflecting the fear that had spread to the citizens below. In homes and streets, daily routines became shadowed by uncertainty. People avoided unnecessary travel and crowded spaces. Farmers left the fields early, gathering what crops they could before nightfall. Merchants closed their stalls earlier, choosing safety over profit. Even the schools, which had once been centers of joy and learning, now held classes with quiet voices and careful eyes on the windows. Teachers told the students stories meant to distract them, but no matter how fantastical or entertaining, the children's minds often returned to the unknown shapes in the forests and hills. Parents struggled to comfort them, offering gentle words, yet even adults could not completely hide the tension in their voices. Every day brought new signs that the mysterious force they had heard about, the Deathworlders, might soon make itself known. As anxiety spread, small acts of bravery became significant. Scouts who ventured further into the wilderness sometimes disappeared entirely, leaving families to hope for their safe return. Some brave individuals took it upon themselves to investigate strange lights in the distance, only to return with stories of massive, silent shapes, moving in ways that defied logic. They described feeling as if they were being observed, not with cruelty, but with an intensity that made the hair on their skin stand on end. Every encounter left a lasting impression on those who experienced it. Even the most fearless citizens admitted that fear was now a constant companion. Sleep became difficult for many, as dreams were haunted by moving shadows, glowing eyes, and strange shapes that seemed to move closer with every passing night. The forests, rivers, and mountains themselves seemed to change in response to the growing tension. Trees, once welcoming and calm, appeared to grow taller, casting longer shadows as though trying to warn or protect the cities below. Rivers shimmered with an almost unnatural light at night, reflecting the twin moons in ways that made the water appear alive. Animals acted differently. Birds refused to sing at their usual hours, and the small creatures that scurried through underbrush became harder to spot, as if hiding from something unknown. Citizens remarked on these changes with quiet concern, often sharing their observations in hushed groups, seeking comfort in the fact that others were watching and noticing the same things. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting alongside the people who lived upon it. In the council chambers, discussions shifted from disbelief to urgent planning. Maps were spread across tables, showing the regions most affected by strange phenomena. Leaders debated where to station guards, where to build shelters, and how to communicate warnings quickly. Some suggested sending envoys to the distant stars, hoping to reach civilizations that might have encountered the Deathworlders before. Others argued that such actions could be dangerous, potentially drawing attention from the very force they wished to avoid. Every option was weighed and reconsidered, but no solution offered complete reassurance. The council faced the difficult task of preparing a society for a threat they could not fully see or understand, knowing that hesitation could be costly, yet premature action could provoke disaster. Amidst all this, life still went on. The citizens found small ways to carry on with their routines, seeking normalcy in a world increasingly dominated by fear. Markets continued to operate, though quieter. Children played, though cautiously, and artists continued to create, though their works often reflected shadows and uncertainty. Even in the face of the unknown, people sought to find light and hope. Communities held quiet gatherings in the evenings, sharing meals and stories, offering comfort and reassurance to each other. In these moments, the citizens felt a sense of unity, a reminder that even when fear threatened to dominate, they could rely on each other for support and courage. Yet the shadow of the unknown grew steadily larger. Each day brought new reports, new signs that something beyond their understanding was approaching. The Deathworlders remained unseen, but their presence was undeniable. People spoke less of ordinary life and more of preparation, vigilance, and survival. The alien civilization, once confident and secure, now lived in a state of constant watchfulness, aware that the world as they knew it could be altered by forces they had never imagined. And so, in quiet cities, along shadowed forests, and across silver rivers, the people waited. They waited for answers, for signs, and for the moment when the unknown would step fully into their world. The night the Deathworlders first appeared was unlike any the alien planet had ever seen. The skies, which had always been calm and familiar, suddenly shimmered with strange lights, flickering like distant stars moving in ways that made the citizens hold their breath. People rushed to their windows and rooftops, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. No one had expected to see them so soon, and the reality of the approaching force struck every heart with a weight that words could not capture. For the first time, the citizens saw the shadowy figures themselves, emerging from the forests and hills with a quiet but undeniable presence. They were taller than the tallest alien, their movements precise, deliberate, and unnervingly silent. Even the wind seemed to pause as they stepped closer to the cities, their shapes blending into the night, yet impossible to ignore. The first encounters were chaotic. Scouts and guards sent to investigate the lights froze when they came face to face with the Deathworlders. Weapons felt meaningless in their hands, not because they were weak, but because the visitors made no aggressive move at first. They watched and waited, like predators studying something new and interesting, yet not immediately dangerous. Citizens held their breath as the figures moved past fields, rivers, and homes, leaving a trail of unease in their wake. Some tried to communicate, waving hands or sending signals. But the Deathworlders did not respond in ways the aliens could understand. Their presence alone caused panic, yet their stillness was even more terrifying than aggression. For many, it was a moment when time seemed to stretch, and the world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The reactions among the alien population were mixed. Some fled, running toward the safety of walls, shelters, and crowded city centers. Families clutched each other, their hearts pounding with fear. Children cried quietly, sensing that something extraordinary and frightening had arrived. Others, more curious than scared, ventured closer, unable to resist the pull of witnessing something completely unknown. Every movement of the Deathworlders was precise and deliberate, causing those who watched to wonder how such strength and coordination could exist. Stories of these first moments spread quickly, and every retelling added layers of awe and terror. Citizens described them as beings larger and more imposing than any creature they had known. Yet their movements were quiet, almost respectful, as if they were aware of the fragility of the world around them. In the days following the initial appearance, the Deathworlders did not act with immediate aggression. Instead, they moved through the lands carefully, examining forests, rivers, and cities without causing direct harm. At first, the aliens could not understand why such a powerful force would appear without attacking. Some leaders assumed it was a test. Others feared a delayed strike. and many ordinary citizens prayed silently for protection. Scouts who had ventured near returned with mixed reports. Some described the visitors observing wildlife, others saw them inspecting structures or objects with intense focus. There was no chaos, no destruction, yet the weight of their presence was undeniable. It was a paradox. Beings capable of immense force had arrived, yet they did not immediately harm, leaving the aliens both terrified and puzzled. Communication attempts were difficult. The alien civilization had advanced systems for language, gestures, and signals, but nothing seemed to reach the Deathworlders. They did not respond to sound or light in ways the aliens could understand. Some scientists tried to study their behavior, noting that every movement appeared purposeful. They seemed to follow patterns, repeating actions with precision, and their attention to detail was remarkable. Animals and plants were treated differently in their presence. Predators that normally roamed freely seemed cautious, and rivers and forests appeared to shift subtly, as if the Deathworlders' presence influenced the environment around them. The alien scientists and observers realized that these beings operated under principles unlike their own. Every observation left them with more questions, each answer suggesting intelligence, discipline, and power beyond imagination. As the days passed, fear began to shift subtly toward a mix of respect and awe. The Deathworlders were not destructive, in the way the aliens had feared, yet their presence reminded everyone that the world was no longer entirely safe. Families remained cautious, still locking doors and staying close. But there were moments of fascination. Children watched from rooftops, whispering to each other about the strange shapes in the forests. Artists and writers found inspiration, capturing the beauty and mystery of the visitors in drawings, stories, and songs. Even in fear, the aliens began to recognize that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that could not be ignored or forgotten. Their world had changed, and they were living through a moment that would be remembered for generations. The leaders of the alien cities struggled with what to do next. Some argued for defense, believing that preparation and display of strength might protect their people. Others insisted on caution, worried that any aggressive action could provoke a force they could not hope to match. Debates continued, often late into the night, as maps, reports, and observations were reviewed. Every day, the Deathworlders moved with quiet purpose, exploring, observing, and leaving a trail of uncertainty. Even the most rational leaders could not fully predict their intentions. And yet, for all the fear, there was also an unmistakable sense that these visitors were not mindless. Every action seemed to follow a reason, a code, a logic that the aliens did not yet understand. That realization changed the nature of fear itself. It was no longer only dread. It became curiosity, a desire to understand a force far beyond their experience. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens adjusted slowly. Life continued in the cities, though it was never quite the same. Markets operated with quieter voices, streets were patrolled with greater care, and schools adjusted schedules to keep children safe. Yet, amidst this caution, people found ways to witness and learn. Scientists, scouts, and explorers began to record observations meticulously. Communities gathered to share information, comparing notes on sightings, patterns, and behavior. Conversations shifted from panic to analysis, even if understanding remained elusive. People began to hope that knowledge might offer some measure of control, even in the face of beings whose power was undeniable. The alien civilization, once confident and unafraid, was learning to adapt, to watch, and to wait with careful attention. By the end of this first week of contact, the alien population had experienced a wide range of emotions: fear, awe, uncertainty, and a tentative respect. The Deathworlders had made their presence undeniable, yet they had not attacked, leaving a delicate balance in the world. Citizens moved through their days with caution, aware that any misstep could provoke unknown consequences. Scouts continued to observe, scientists continued to study, and families continued to protect each other. And through it all, the twin suns rose and set over a planet that had learned, perhaps for the first time, that the universe was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The aliens waited, watched, and wondered, knowing that the next steps could change their lives forever, yet also sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A moment when fear and curiosity intertwined in a way that would shape the future of their civilization. As days turned into weeks, the aliens began to notice patterns in the Deathworlders' behavior. At first, every action had seemed mysterious, frightening, and unpredictable. But slowly, small signs revealed a method to their movements, a purpose behind their presence. The Deathworlders were careful observers, moving through forests, rivers, and cities with an almost scientific precision. They did not harm the inhabitants, and they seemed particularly attentive to natural elements. Trees that had fallen in, storms were straightened, rivers that had changed course were nudged back, and animals that had been endangered were found and protected. At first, the aliens could hardly believe what they were seeing. The creatures they had feared as destroyers were acting in ways that were helpful, though their methods remained strange and incomprehensible. Reports from scouts and scientists spread quickly. People spoke in hushed voices about witnessing the Deathworlders lifting enormous rocks to save trapped animals or repairing bridges that had collapsed during storms. The visitors' strength and skill were astonishing. They worked quietly, never calling attention to themselves, yet their presence was unmistakable. The citizens began to realize that the Deathworlders were not motivated by cruelty or conquest. They had a strict code, a set of rules and goals that guided their actions, even if the aliens could not understand them fully. Fear began to mingle with curiosity. Families still watched carefully from windows and rooftops, but some could not help but admire the creatures' efficiency and determination. Even the youngest children noticed that the Deathworlders acted as if they cared about the world around them, in ways that were foreign but fascinating. The Council of Leaders convened. More frequently, they shared reports and observations, trying to piece together the meaning of the Deathworlders' presence. Some leaders were still cautious, arguing that appearances could be deceiving, that even helpful actions might be part of a larger plan they could not see. Others believed that understanding the Deathworlders' logic could help the aliens coexist safely. Meetings became discussions of learning and adaptation as much as they were debates about defense. They sent more envoys to observe, record, and even attempt communication, experimenting with gestures, lights, and sounds. The Deathworlders remained distant but attentive. When an envoy approached respectfully, the visitors often paused, observing, quietly, and then returned to their work without aggression. These encounters taught the aliens an important lesson. Patience, observation, and careful understanding could reveal intentions that fear alone could not. The ordinary citizens noticed changes, too. Life in the cities and villages slowly adjusted to the constant presence of the Deathworlders. Children, while still cautious, began to watch from safe distances, sometimes laughing quietly at the strange movements and interactions of the visitors. Farmers and workers began to recognize that areas improved by the Deathworlders often yielded better crops or had healthier animals. Markets and towns remained on alert, but daily routines regained a sense of normalcy. Citizens began to speak of the visitors with a mix of caution and respect, describing them not as enemies, but as beings whose methods were foreign yet purposeful. People learned to watch without panic, to observe without interference, and to accept that there was wisdom in the visitors' actions, even if they could not comprehend it fully. Communication remained a challenge, yet small breakthroughs began to occur. The aliens discovered that gestures, signals, and certain patterns of sound could capture the Deathworlders' attention. Envoys who approached with patience and respect were observed more closely, and some visitors even appeared to mimic basic movements, suggesting recognition or understanding. While dialogue was still impossible, the aliens could sense that the visitors were capable of learning and responding, even if slowly. This realization strengthened the resolve of the council and ordinary citizens alike. Fear was not gone, but it was balanced by cautious optimism and a desire to learn. The presence of the Deathworlders became less of a constant terror and more of a challenge to understand and adapt to. Nature itself seemed to respond to the Deathworlders' actions. Forests that had been damaged by storms appeared healthier, rivers flowed more clearly, and animals that had once been in danger returned to their habitats. The citizens were astonished by these subtle improvements. Some began to document the changes, keeping records of the visitors' movements and effects on the environment. Scientists worked alongside scouts to map the patterns, attempting to predict future actions. They noticed that the Deathworlders focused on areas that had long been neglected or damaged, correcting imbalances with quiet efficiency. Even those who had been most fearful could not deny the visible benefits. Slowly, the understanding grew that the visitors were not only powerful, but also purposeful, and that their goals included preservation and order in ways the aliens had never seen before. As trust grew, so did cooperation, even without direct communication. The aliens learned to move cautiously around the visitors, leaving areas clear when they worked and observing quietly from a distance. Families taught children the importance of patience and respect, emphasizing the value of learning from beings whose ways were different yet effective. Communities organized themselves to monitor the movements of the Deathworlders, not with weapons or hostility, but with careful attention and documentation. This shift in perspective was remarkable. Fear, once overwhelming, had evolved into understanding, curiosity, and cautious respect. People began to see the Deathworlders not as an immediate threat, but as a force with rules, patterns, and intentions that could be studied and adapted to. The Council's final realization was profound. The Deathworlders were teaching lessons, without words. They demonstrated discipline, strength, and purpose, and their presence encouraged the alien civilization to grow in wisdom and patience. Leaders recognized that this was an opportunity, not just a challenge. The alien people were learning to observe without panic, to adapt without aggression, and to respect forces far beyond their previous experience. Even the youngest citizens, who once hid in fear, now watched with fascination and quiet admiration. The world had changed, and the lessons of this change were being learned slowly but surely. By the end of this period of observation, the alien civilization had transformed in subtle but important ways. Life continued, and while caution remained, it was balanced by curiosity and respect. Citizens were more aware of their surroundings, more attentive to nature, and more patient in their daily lives. The Deathworlders' presence, once a source of terror, had become a teacher of sorts, showing through actions rather than words the value of purpose, observation, and careful action. Families, scouts, scientists, and leaders alike carried these lessons forward, knowing that the world would never be the same. They had faced fear, watched the unknown, and discovered that understanding could emerge from observation, patience, and careful attention to the intentions of those who were different. The aliens had learned something profound. The universe was full of mysteries and forces beyond comprehension, and survival required not only courage but also understanding. The Deathworlders, powerful and enigmatic, had stepped into their lives not to destroy, but to challenge and teach. And in that quiet, careful way, the alien civilization grew wiser, more united, and more aware of the delicate balance between fear and knowledge, between power and purpose, and between the unknown and the understanding that could emerge when beings watched, waited, and learned. Time passed, and the aliens learned to live with the constant presence of the Deathworlders. At first, fear had dominated every thought, every movement, and every decision. But now, a new rhythm had emerged in the cities, forests, and villages. The citizens were no longer paralyzed by panic, though caution remained. They had begun to understand the patterns, the intentions, and the careful, deliberate actions of the Deathworlders. Life continued, but it was a life transformed. Streets buzzed softly with activity, markets filled with quieter voices, and children ventured a little further from their homes, always watching and learning. The alien society had adjusted, finding ways to coexist with a force that was both powerful and unpredictable, and in doing so they discovered lessons they had never expected to learn. The Deathworlders themselves became an accepted presence, though still mysterious. They moved through the forests and across rivers with their precise efficiency, carrying out tasks that benefited the planet in subtle ways. Bridges were repaired, habitats restored, and injured creatures returned to health. Citizens observed, from safe distances, recording patterns and behavior, finding in the visitors a source of knowledge they could not fully explain. Scouts who had once feared every shadow now walked with careful confidence, understanding that the Deathworlders' purpose was not destruction but balance. They communicated through observation and gestures rather than words, and slowly, the aliens learned to respect these silent signals, knowing when to approach, when to wait, and when to give space. Communities adapted to this new reality with creativity and care. Farmers left parts of their fields untouched when they knew the Deathworlders were working nearby, allowing the visitors to influence the land without interference. Builders and engineers adjusted their schedules to avoid crossing paths unnecessarily, and children were taught to watch quietly and respectfully rather than hide in fear. Even celebrations and festivals changed slightly, with moments of pause to acknowledge the powerful visitors who now walked among them. Fear had not disappeared, but it had evolved into awareness, understanding, and a cautious respect that became a guiding principle in daily life. The aliens had learned that coexistence required patience, observation, and humility. The leaders of the alien cities also embraced this new understanding. The council no longer focused solely on defense or preparation for potential attack. Instead, they worked to document, understand, and adapt to the Deathworlders' patterns. Envoys were trained to observe carefully, interpret subtle signals, and respond with calm patience. Plans were made not for confrontation, but for coexistence, and strategies were developed to use knowledge of the visitors' behavior to protect both the citizens and the planet's natural balance. Meetings were filled with discussion, debate, and observation, but there was a sense of unity and purpose that had not existed before. The alien civilization was learning to thrive in a world that had once seemed dominated by fear. Education and culture reflected the transformation as well. Children learned about the Deathworlders not as monsters, but as teachers of a new kind. Artists painted scenes of their movements, capturing the silent power and precision of the visitors. Writers told stories of bravery, patience, and understanding, emphasizing the importance of careful observation and respect for the unknown. Scientists studied their actions, noting how ecosystems improved when the Deathworlders intervened and how patterns of behavior could be predicted and learned from. Across the planet, knowledge grew alongside awareness, and the alien people discovered a sense of connection to forces larger than themselves. Fear remained, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was balanced by respect, curiosity, and understanding. Even in nature, the presence of the Deathworlders brought lasting changes. Forests flourished where they had been damaged. Rivers ran clearer than they had in decades, and wildlife returned to habitats that had been neglected or threatened. Citizens marveled at these transformations, recognizing the positive impact of beings they had once only feared. Children played among healthier trees and along brighter rivers, learning not only about their world, but also about the importance of patience, respect, and observation. Farmers benefited from the subtle guidance of the Deathworlders, with crops yielding more consistently and animals thriving under the careful balance maintained by the visitors. Life, though altered, had grown richer and more vibrant. Social life adapted as well. Communities found ways to gather safely without disturbing the visitors, holding quiet ceremonies and celebrations in honor of balance, growth, and survival. Families taught the next generation about respect, observation, and the value of learning from those who were different. Scouts and scientists became teachers, sharing knowledge of the Deathworlders' patterns and actions with the general population. Even the youngest children understood that the universe held mysteries and that survival required patience, intelligence, and careful attention. The alien civilization had grown stronger, wiser, and more united because of the challenge posed by a force far beyond their previous understanding. By the time months had passed, a new balance had been established. The citizens moved with confidence, though always aware of the Deathworlders' presence. The visitors continued their work quietly, observing and acting with purpose, and the aliens had learned to watch, respect, and coexist. The world, once shadowed by fear, now thrived under the careful attention of these powerful beings. Knowledge and observation replaced panic, and cooperation, even unspoken, shaped daily life. Families, children, scientists, and leaders all participated in this delicate harmony, finding ways to live alongside a force that had once been unimaginable. The lessons learned were profound. The aliens discovered that fear, while natural, could be transformed into understanding through careful observation, patience, and respect. They realized that power did not always equal destruction, and that beings far different from themselves could act with purpose, even if that purpose was not immediately clear. They learned that coexistence required adaptation, humility, and the willingness to study and respect forces beyond one's control. And perhaps most importantly, they discovered that survival was not only about defense or avoidance, but also about learning, growing, and embracing the unknown with courage and careful attention. In the end, the alien civilization emerged stronger and wiser. Life continued, full of activity, curiosity, and growth. The twin suns rose and set over cities, forests, and rivers, casting light on a world that had changed forever. Children played under the watchful shadows of the visitors, learning lessons that no school could teach. Families moved through their days with a careful balance of caution and confidence. Scientists, leaders, and scouts recorded and observed, always mindful of the presence that had transformed their understanding of the universe. And above all, the citizens understood that the Deathworlders, though silent and mysterious, had become part of the story of their world, a story of fear transformed into understanding, of shadows giving way to knowledge, and of a civilization learning to live wisely in a universe far larger and stranger than they had ever imagined. The planet had survived the first contact, and in doing so had grown. Its people had faced fear, observed carefully, and adapted to a force beyond their comprehension. They had learned the value of patience, the importance of respect, and the power of understanding. And as the Deathworlders continued their quiet work, the alien civilization thrived under a new balance, forever changed, yet stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before.